Hey guys, you got Schottzie here. Still no word from Rob Butcher. That's okay. All right, listen, I wanted to focus on some of the most underrated Cincinnati Reds. Let's start with the first one on here. I have no numbers for this guy. I just think he was such a solid veteran player for this Reds team. Oh yeah, by the way, this is the most underrated players of the past 10 years, the decade, right? But Miguel Cairo. Miguel Cairo was such a salty veteran. Pinch hitter off the bench. He wasn't the kind of guy that stole signs, but probably could have if he wanted to. He was kind of like a David Ross after the Reds had David Ross. A lot of people forget that the Reds had David Ross. And Miguel Cairo has usually always been on winning teams, and when the Reds brought him over, it really indicated that this franchise is going to start winning again. Winning Reds baseball. Here's a second guy on my list. I do have numbers for this because he's controversial. Matt Latos. The Reds traded everybody for Matt Latos. I mean, everybody except Rob Butcher ended up on that trade. And there's a lot of people that think that the deal wasn't good. I'm kind of split. Because, yeah, I mean, the Reds traded away a lot of talent. A lot of people forget that Brad Boxberger was in that deal. And Boxberger went on to have a pretty good year, a couple of good years with Tampa Bay. If you look back at Matt Latos, Latos was an ace for 3 years with the Reds. And, you know, when he first came over, it was like this kind of weird, really big, chunky guy that, like, chewed kind of weird. People thought he was kind of going to be a disaster, especially after all the guys that the Reds traded for him. But his first year, 3.48 ERA. Next year, 3.16. 2014, 3.25. Oh, by the way, I'm kind of hard on the Reds for some of the trades that they make, but this trade, Anthony DeSclafani, pretty much a straight-up deal that the Reds pulled off. So not only did he give you 3 great years, I mean, honestly, would you trade Yasmani Grandal and Yonder Alonso for Anthony DeSclafani? Maybe. As I mentioned on one of my Instagram posts, DeSclafani has the highest strikeout to walk ratio in Reds history.
Honestly, the day Matt was traded was the day that I had the pleasure of not worrying about Matt anymore.
Matt Latos obviously bashed the Reds on the way out. Sure, he gave up a 4-run home run, also known as a grand slam by some, to Buster Posey. Ryan Hannigan absolutely lost it when that happened. I'll never forget that. He lost his cool, and yeah, it was just weird, and it was sad. The Reds blew it. But again, Matt Latos, a very underrated player, one of the Reds' best pitchers of the past decade. Ramon Hernandez, in the Miguel Cairo kind of mold. But Ramon Hernandez is one of the Reds' best hitting catchers of the past 10, 15, 20 years. Devin Mesoraco had that one crazy year where he had like an 850 OPS. It was 2014, I believe. But Ramon Hernandez had some excellent years. His OPS was in the mid-750s. I think he touched close to 800. But he was another salty veteran. You know, early 2010, 2011 teams, you talk Votto, you talk BP, you talk Cueto, you talk Chapman. Not a lot of people talk about Ramon Hernandez. Salty veteran, a guy that could hit but really handle a pitching staff well, and very, very underrated, as a lot of catchers usually just are in general. So here's another guy that I will admit when they first made the trade for him, I thought was a stupid move. Jonathan Broxton was, or I guess is, one of the most dominant, one of the most dominant Reds relievers of the past 10 years outside of Aroldis Chapman. Broxton came over from the Dodgers, he came over from the Royals, sorry, when people thought he was pretty much done. He was always a big guy, but he was at least 300 pounds. His velocity was a tick down, I believe, his control all over the place. But he came over for the Reds and really just lit it up. I mean, the Reds traded next to nothing for him. It was 2 minor leaguers. I remember one was Donnie Joseph. I don't even remember the other guy. And I mean, if I know Donnie Joseph, then I probably know a lot of Reds minor leaguers. But his ERA was a 2.8. But he came over, he kind of reinvented himself in a way. He used to be a Powder River kind of guy. He struck out less than 9 guys per outing, per appearance. He only struck out about 80 guys in his career at the Reds, and he pitched about 110 innings. His whip was 1.1. It was a little bit under 1.1. That's better than Raisel Iglesias. Iglesias had a bit of a down year, I guess you'll say, last year. But in 2018, you remember how dominant he was. His was 1.06. Last year was 1.22. So Broxton roughly had a better career than Raisel Iglesias in 3 years, and Iglesias has been with the Reds in 5. So not to dump on Iglesias, I'm just putting into perspective how underrated Jonathan Broxton was. All right, and my last one here. These are in no particular order, by the way. Dan Straily, 1, I think taught a lot of the young Reds guys how to pitch. 2, he brought them Luis Castillo. Flat out. I mean, that's it. But Dan Straily, a lot of people forget how good of a pitcher he was. Every time he took the ball, and that was a bad Reds team he played on. That 2016 Reds team was very, very bad. It bought them Hunter Green. That's how bad it was. They had the number 2 overall pick after that year. But Dan Straily, about a 3.7 ERA. He didn't walk guys. His whip was under 1.2, I believe. Yeah, I mean, his whip, I'm not looking this up. I just know this on my top of my head. It was 1.186. I just knew that. You know who Dan Straily reminds me a lot of, and this is a throwback for real Reds fans here, but Elmer Descends. Elmer Descends was such a consistent ball player, didn't put up huge numbers, and wasn't really flashy about his pitching. But every time he went out there, he kept the Reds in the game, and for really bad teams. But after the end of the game, or when you would sit down to watch a game, you knew if Elmer was on the mound or if Dan was on the mound, then the Reds were probably going to have a competitive chance. They'd probably lose, but it wasn't because of those guys. So anyway, these are the most underrated Reds of the decade, according to me. I'm Schottzie.